All right, welcome everybody to the Upgrade Your Energy workshop for Momentum. I'm so excited to have you all here. A little context and then we'll dive right in. I recently was doing a pivot train the trainer for one of my bigger clients, and they wanted to combine the pivot certification training with Strengthscope, this assessment that some of you have chosen to take. And if you didn't, that's okay too. You'll still get a ton out of today's workshop. And for 2 days, I went through certification on this tool, or instrument, as they like to call it. And then the following 2 days were on pivot. And these two things really tied in very nicely together because, as those of you who are familiar with pivot know, pivot is all about building from what's working, what your biggest strengths are, and what energizes you most at work. And so this instrument was such a powerful way, and it gave all of us, even me, I've taken every assessment under the sun, gave me some really great language to think about how I approach my own work. And then even working with Marisol and Shikan Coterie and others on my team, how we talk about dividing and conquering based on energy, not just based on strengths, which is what we're good at. So today in this session, Upgrade Your Energy, we are going to get into how to understand more clearly what energizes you at work, what drains you, and then strategies for dealing with both of those things. And then certainly language, if you collaborate with anyone else in your day-to-day work, how to communicate around that. And if you haven't already, you can pull up this workbook, the Upgrade Your Energy Toolkit. All of this is, you'll see this logo and the name Helios. That's the company that did certification. So just a little clarification. Helios is the company that runs Strengthscope in the US. Strengthscope is the actual name of the assessment, the instrument that will give you your energy strengths. And Helios is the one that does the training and created even this presentation that I'm delivering. So as soon as I got home, I thought this would be great to pilot with Momentum. And those of you who did take the assessment, you know it was 55. That's just we're not earning any money on this in Momentum. I'm grateful to all of you that you're giving me a chance to practice the material. And I was really and am excited to give you exposure to this instrument. I love that in Momentum, we're all kind of assessment geeks, not all of us, but there are many people who are even certified in different StrengthsFinder or Gallup strengths. And so it will also be interesting to just continue the conversation. And certainly we could do more workshops like this around some of those other instruments as well, if you find it helpful. So if you see Helios, and I would ask that with this toolkit, it's at bit.ly/upgrade your energy toolkit, would just ask that you not share it or reproduce it because I have certain licensing rights that I've signed on for, but this is really for your own personal use. If you have any questions as we go, feel free to let me know in the chat. And if you're having any trouble seeing or hearing or grabbing the toolkit, just let me know. Excellent. I'm so happy to see you all here. This is just great, great, great. All my favorite people in one place. All right, so now I will turn off my video just for a little bit while we dive into the content. How many of you saw the movie Free Solo? This is Alex Hammond. He's a climber who, I don't know if it will mess up. Let me see if I can play this video. I think it might kind of screw things up, but it's really cool. Can you see Safari opening? Can someone type in chat? Unfortunately, there's not a way for me to test this in advance. Okay, you can't. All right, so I'm going to go back to the presentation and then I'll just tell you about it. But tell me in chat for those of you who have seen it. I'd be really curious to know. Free Solo is this incredible movie where Alex Hammond has the goal to climb El Capitan in Yosemite. And you watch him climb without ropes at these incredible heights. And you can see that he is so completely in a state of flow while he does it, that he's locked in. It's almost a flow state is almost one of these out-of-body experiences where you're so focused on what you're doing. Another way to describe that, especially as it relates to work, is you at your best. And it's not a question we're often asked either by others or that we ask ourselves. When are you your best at work? We see this flow state. This flow was a term many of you are probably familiar with. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi. That's the author of the book called Flow. And the way that Mihai defines a flow state is at the intersection of challenge and skill. So if you have just enough challenge and just enough skill, and you're at the edge of those two things, this perfect intersection, that will put you into a flow state. If you don't have enough challenge, but you have a lot of skill, that will send you into boredom. And then if you have not enough skill, but quite a lot of challenge, that will send you into a state of anxiety. So you could probably see how throughout your day and your week, you're going in and out. Sometimes you're in a flow state. Sometimes you're bored. Sometimes you're anxious. Sometimes you're procrastinating. Sometimes you're dreading. And it kind of goes like that. And one thing I noticed about myself, even as someone who talks about pivot and teaches the material all the time, is that I don't think prior to doing this Strengthscope workshop, I don't think that I had necessarily and reliably said, oh yeah, I know exactly what puts me in a flow state, and I build my week around it. Even if I could say, oh yeah, I know when time's flying, I don't think I ever consciously changed too much, at least in terms of running my own business. I knew when I left Google that I felt that I was in my zone of genius only about 20% of the time. I was creating new things and speaking in front of a room and spreading my message to a group even outside of Google. But in the last 8 years of self-employment, I kind of go for what's working. I mean, pivot itself is based on what's working, but it is very interesting if you start to think about how can we get better at not just predicting and knowing what will put us in a flow state, but changing our week and negotiating the roles that you have accordingly. And that doesn't just have to mean you're self-employed. This will give you a lot of language that you can use with everybody that you work with and collaborate with. We see flow in sports, in surfing, and where we tend to see it the least of everything is at work. And why is that? Part of it goes back to this you at your best. When was the last time you were asked, when are you your best at work? When we typically think about strengths, it's often as competency strength, meaning when you take something like StrengthsFinder, it's telling you what you're best at. And that's often the language that we use as well. My strengths are organizing and systems and etc. But the way that we're defining strengths or true strengths for the purposes of this workshop on upgrading your energy, true strengths are at the intersection of two things. Yes, competence is important, abilities, skills, talents, but it's also equally important what energizes you. So this is the piece that I find fascinating. And then you'll hear me say over and over today the term energy strengths, because sometimes we take assessments and it will tell you what you're good at, or you'll get feedback from a manager, or you even just know certain things you're good at, but they're not always the same as those things that energize you. And if you think about it, doing work that energizes you, that means you're intrinsically motivated to do it. It's the work that you look forward to. It's the work that you're jumping out of bed for. It's the work that doesn't even feel like work. It feels like play. And the more of that you can have on your plate, the more intrinsic motivation you have, the less you have to draw on willpower or forcing yourself to do things. It's very likely that if you're procrastinating or something is getting bottlenecked, we have the bottleneck buster template in Momentum, that it's because it's a drainer. Whatever that thing is that you're procrastinating on, if not the entire task, there is a part of it that is draining for you. When we think about work, a lot of us also try to, well, sometimes, I would say in Momentum, this is a group that's more self-aware and growth-oriented. But one thing to keep in mind is that when we build from our strengths, again, not just competency strengths, but energy strengths, we feel a sense of empowerment and possibility, and our choices open up before us, and we feel powerful. We feel totally equipped to do what we set our minds to. And if not totally equipped, then we're at least in our stretch zone, as I would say in a pivot context, and feeling excited about the challenge. The alternative is a path of limitation. So when we talk about weaknesses, what's not working, it narrows our choices and we feel a sense of helplessness. And this is so aligned. You can see how aligned this material is with pivot. That even in pivot, I share the anecdote of the grandfather and the grandson. And the grandson says, or the grandfather says, we have two wolves fighting inside of us, love and joy, or fear and hate. And the grandson asks, well, which wolf wins the fight? And the grandfather responds, the one you feed. So as you think about work, it's a good exercise to look and pause throughout your day, especially as you consider some of the new material that you'll learn today. When are you on a path of possibility, and when are you going down a path of limitation? And when you find yourself on a path of limitation, focusing on weaknesses or just even feeling that sense of helplessness or analysis paralysis or even self-blame, like, oh, there's something wrong with me. Why am I procrastinating? What's my problem? That's often an indicator that you're on this path of limitation. Many of us in this group are familiar with positive psychology, all kinds of assessments. We've talked about StrengthsFinder, there's appreciative inquiry. Positive psychology is a huge movement, and the crux of it really is emphasizing the positive, as the name implies. And some of you in Momentum have even gone through, there's a great positive psychology certification program. But that's really where this comes from. And Strengthscope measures energy intelligence. So you've heard the term EQ, emotional intelligence. And this is really about becoming more intelligent and aware and able to communicate about your own energy, because each of us have an energy blueprint that's as unique as a fingerprint. They did a study when McKinsey did a study where they asked executives how much more productive they were at their peak performance, their flow state, than on average during a given work week. And the managers responded that they probably estimated is about they were 5 times more productive when they were in a flow state and then when they weren't. So if you were to do that, if you were to just increase your work week, increase your flow state by 20%, one day a week, it would double your overall productivity. And some of you probably know this feeling, if you're a morning person, how much more you get done in the morning than when you try to work, let's say mid-afternoon, when your body's circadian rhythm is just at a total trough. It's down very low. And similarly, if you're a night owl, you might know the feeling that in the morning you can't think at all. You're so groggy. You're like worthless to try and do critical thinking, and that you do your best work at night, and that's when you thrive. So the question is, how do we arrange our work and our day to find this flow state, as I mentioned earlier? So Wade asked a great question. How do you define energy when you say energy intelligence? I get it, but looking for words to use when I say those words. Let me actually get into some of the next portion, Wade, and then I'll come back to that, because that's a great question. What I like about the assessment is that it will give you some language. So I want to take a moment and give you a chance to reflect for a minute. What energizes you most? Think about a time that you were recently in a flow state at work. And you might think back on the last week, if you were lucky to have one during the last week, maybe the last month, or even this year so far. What was a peak flow state that you had at work? I'll give you just a moment to think of one. And go ahead and type it in the chat. So once you have one, or I would love if you pop off of mute as well. So feel free you could come off of mute and on video. And it would be great to hear from a few of you of what a recent flow state looked like. Is that you, Wade?
Yeah, hi.
Perfect. Hi.
I would say when I was writing a blog post slash newsletter last week, I was like, oh, I was just totally in it, and time went by and it just came out of me. I didn't really even kind of pause.
I love it. And what was it about writing that blog post that felt so freeing to you?
It was personal. It had been something that I'd been thinking about. It's about the winds of shoulds. And so it's been kind of this like concept that has come up in my meditation that I've kind of brought up in discussions with people. So it was really tangible. And I just was kind of processing and just kind of word vomited out on the page, and not attached to like, does this make sense? Or what am I going to do with this yet? I just kind of let it get out of me first.
Amazing. I love how you described time stopped, felt like it stopped. Awesome. Thank you. Who else has a recent flow experience at work that you can share?
Can you hear me?
Megan? Yes, perfect.
Oh, sorry, Megan, did you want to go?
Stephanie. Go ahead, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you. For me, the reason why I quit my job and my last day is tomorrow is because most of my job has been a huge energy suck, and that's what I realized. So this is like so timely today of really focusing on that. But for me, my favorite part of my job was just like the AM, like the one-on-ones with my account managers and getting to work with my team on, their careers and how they're moving forward. And that's, what made me realize I just needed to go out on my own. But it's cool to reflect on that. And it's like, that's really the only thing that kept me going. So.
And isn't that interesting that for you, the energizer was meeting one-on-one with the account managers, but also realizing why something doesn't work. Like even I had that experience. I had this aha moment before I decided to take a leave from union, when I realized the whole environment is so draining. It has nothing to do with my energizers. It was like a complete mismatch of what energized me and the culture that I was in. It was so interesting that you're describing something very similar.
Absolutely. Yeah. And just getting out of the office. So
yeah.
People. I'm like, I love people, but I don't want to be around people.
Yeah. That's so interesting. Megan, how about you? And then I'll read Kevin just added one too. Yeah.
So actually what you guys were just talking about made me realize, so I've been, out of work for the last 10 months. I just started back freelancing at my old company and have fallen very quickly into old habits and feeling that energy suck from just like, oh, this is why I left. So that kind of reminded me of that. But I felt like, so lately what I've been doing is trying to kind of really pinpoint where it is that I want to go. I've kind of identified like the universe, and now I'm just trying to kind of pinpoint. And so I've been doing a lot of Post-it note exercises on my wall. Great. And I find I'm in like a state of flow when I do those, because I can start to kind of pull different ideas together, and it makes me really excited about the different opportunities I might pursue.
So like visioning, possibility, imagining.
Yes, exactly.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah.
And Kevin, and then again, another interesting case of knowing, and sometimes I think, what I've noticed about myself, even learning this material, that I didn't really know why exactly certain things were draining me. And then now I do. Now I have like a little more precise language, but sometimes you just know, oh, this is so draining. We don't unpack it. Or, oh yeah, I'm in a state of flow, but we don't quite unpack it. Kevin said, I love researching things. I've been looking into how to start a podcast. Woo, and feel energized by learning more about it. Yeah, learning. That's a big one. Anyone else? Carrie said ENTJ. I bet we have a bunch of ENTJs.
So Jenny, I had a really interesting experience where I did experience flow, but slightly different than what you're all describing, because I know that zone when I'm creative and I'm writing or I'm working on something where I'm like in that zone. But last Saturday, we've got some major budget stuff happening with our governor, and that's affecting my work right now. And so I was at a House Finance community meeting. There was about 250 local people, and suddenly I was going to testify on behalf of the school district about funding. So I made notes, and I had 5 minutes to speak to the committee, House Finance Committee, and our legislators. And I really practiced all my breathing before, but I love the description you said, that flow is the intersection of challenge and skill. So I practiced, I just went over it in my head, and I knew my points, but then something else happens when I start speaking, and I practiced being in second circle from the class I took of how to have presence. And it was like, as I was giving it, I knew the power that was coming from me as I spoke. So I was totally present, but I was slightly observing at the same time. And it was a different state of flow than I've experienced before. And that's happened sometimes when I'm speaking, where this other thing happens, but it was really powerful. The testimony was outstanding. And I had a lot of feedback, even from one of the legislators who's Speaker of the House, that I met afterwards. And he said, your testimony was outstanding. Wow. Now I know a name to your face. But it had an impact, and I could feel that happening at the same time as I was really holding this space of challenge and skill. But I wasn't anxious, like in front of a big picketing thing and being interviewed live on the news a couple days later. That I really had to prep for, and then I wasn't quite in total flow. But last Saturday I was, for that 5 minutes, and I could hear it in my voice, which was interesting.
Oh,
I don't know if you had any, but it was a different type of flow.
Well, it sounds also like high stakes. So there's, in the Strengthscope assessment, there's one part of the wheel that's emotional control. And for people who, that's an energizer, and I just have this curious hit. I wonder if it's there for you or not, but they're really good under pressure. And almost what you're describing, you were able to prepare enough and go into a high stakes or an important situation and not just maintain composure, but really speak from a powerful place. And that for you,
I feel that now. So the energy just went poof for that. Because
I'm
really aware of the high stakes and the voice that I'm presenting, of staying super clear, super on target, and both factual and emotional. So the high stakes piece you just said, that named it. But it was a different kind than just the creative energizing. It had power about it, or energy about it.
And it's for something you really believe in. So I'm also hearing this part of it is advocacy, like being able to advocate for something important, high stakes. It's a nerve-wracking moment, but then you rise to the challenge. And that's so, and then how interesting too, that the picket line a couple days later was more draining. That even though you prepared.
I don't know if it was draining, but I'm not as comfortable on a news camera, especially in Alaska, the Anchorage News Channel drove down and talked to me and wanted to interview me before this big thing with the governor. And there was parents and picketers, and they didn't ask, she told me right before we went live on 5 News, her questions, and they weren't quite what we had talked about earlier. So I just recognized that afternoon, the high stakes thing. Thank you. I need it. I'm going to put that on my whiteboard, because I knew for the hours ahead of time that whatever I said, I really did a lot of thought about it reaching the right person, and there's massive high stakes.
Yeah, you're right. And it's like, it's a little different than the on-camera news. It's just, thank you so much. What a powerful story, and recent experience too.
Yeah.
Elizabeth writes, flow state when I'm writing articles that I'm passionate about, just like you, Stephanie. Wade had mentioned the writing. And flow state doing effective one-on-one coaching calls. Outside of work, flow state when I'm challenging myself to keep up with someone at swimming who is just a bit faster than me. Ooh, that's great. Swimming. Such a beautiful flow state possibility there for sure. Does anyone else want to share a recent flow experience or what energized you about it?
I have one from yesterday.
Sure.
This is Theo. So yesterday I was talking to one of the administrators at the coding boot camp that I'm going to, and she's one of the administrators specifically for our class, and I guess she handles other cohorts as well. And I was just explaining to her how much fun I was having and how great it was. And then I also worked into the conversation. I said, it's not perfect and there's room for improvement. And we spent probably 15 minutes talking about that, because I was like, I think you guys are great. I think you guys can be better. And so I went through a whole bunch of things, and we're going to have a follow-up meeting. And I could tell how animated I was about the whole thing, because I have a really analytical mind, and I could see all the places that they were tripping up and not handling things as well. And it's in like the very beginning. Like if you can't get people into the doors, you can't show them how awesome you are.
Right.
And so I'm going to talk to her more about that kind of stuff. And I could see how incredibly energized I was about having those conversations. And I'm also thinking about teaching at some point. So I don't know what any of that means, but I have
very
some
interesting.
Anyway.
Well, I love that. I love that it involves the critical thinking and giving feedback, and it makes me think of when we first met. You were giving us feedback on the website. You were saying, "Hey, I love your work, but here's a bulleted list of 10 things."
I don't think it was a but. I think it was an and.
Yeah, an and. So it's really cool to know that. That like this same thing applies, like being for you, critical thinking and problem solving and giving feedback really energizes you. And it's such a powerful way that you make meaningful connections as well. It's so unique.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it also has to do with other people's work. So it's not me creating something from scratch necessarily. It's me looking at someone else's work, someone who has like really great talent, and then saying, okay, how can we improve this and take this to the next level? So there's some clues there.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. That's so interesting. And and for someone there are some who have creativity and initiative, and they have to be creating something new. I just had a coaching session right before this where the person doesn't want to be getting into the details or thinking critically. He wants to be like creating new big ideas. So it's really what I find powerful about hearing what puts each of us into a flow state is it can be so different. And even the same word, strategic thinking or problem solving, can be applied in so many different ways.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Theo. Can you guys all see the presentation? Just want to make sure. Okay. I saw there was a question about flow state. There is a fascinating diagram. Maybe Theo or one of our intrepid web hunters can go track it down and put a link in the chat. It's a really cool image of the flow state. And it's just, look, if you Google like flow diagram, you'll see the different states of kind of arousal, boredom, anxiety, and then where that flow state is. So I'll work it into the presentation next time. Let's keep moving. So when we talk about a recipe for flow, it's really a combination of your skills and talents. We talked about the intersection of skill and challenge, plus more energizing activities, minus fewer derailing activities. That's what we're going to get into now. This is where Strengthscope comes in. Knowing that not everybody took the assessment, I'm not going to get too detailed with the report itself, but I do want to give a high-level overview. And then any of you who haven't yet taken it, if you want to, the offer always stands. So if any of you want to take it, Marisol, just go to that link in Facebook to check out. Again, it's $55 wholesale. I have no skin in the game as far as like selling this. It's just if you want, if even after this session and you watch the recording and you want an assessment, it's always available to you. If you do have it, you can turn to page 3 and you'll see your significant 7 energy strengths. If you haven't taken the assessment, you can start to think about looking, and in fact, I'm going to come back to that previous slide for a moment. But when you get the assessment, what it will show you is your significant 7 in no particular order. And if we look at this wheel here, that would be all the lines that you see in purple. So you'll see for this person, optimism, collaboration, it keeps advancing. Optimism, collaboration, empathy, leading, persuasiveness, and decisiveness. So if you take the assessment and you get the significant 7, you'll see, okay, these are part of your recipe now for getting into a flow state. These are the things that energize you most. It's very common to look at this assessment and say, oh, I'm really good at leading, or I'm really bad at efficiency. that would be a slight misreading in this case. So rather than saying, wow, this person is really bad at efficiency, it's just that efficiency drains them. They're not that obsessed with the details. Think about what type of person this energy blueprint would be. They love leading. They're optimistic. They love collaboration. They're empathy. They have strong empathy and persuasiveness, and they're decisive. With a lot of self-confidence as well. So maybe they would be a great leader. They could be a great salesperson. This person clearly wants to be working with people, and they're energized. The self-confidence as an energizer is you like to be an expert. You like to be out in front. Whereas someone else might have a lot more in this blue bar. I know you can't exactly see it, but the blue section is thinking. So the 4 sections of the wheel, there's emotional is the green in the upper leftmost quadrant. Then there's thinking in the bottom left-hand quadrant. And the bottom right quadrant is execution. And then the upper right quadrant is relationships. And so you can see that even if you don't have your own wheel, you could think about where do I gravitate toward? Do I gravitate toward people or tasks? Do I gravitate toward external facing activities or internal? And this kind of also speaks to the introvert extrovert question, what energizes you and what drains you. If you did take the assessment, any blue bars that are almost as long as a purple bar, we call those bubbling up strengths. So for this person, even though enthusiasm didn't become one of the significant 7, it's still bubbling up. It's still quite high. And if in the lower right-hand corner, you could see initiative. Initiative is also bubbling up for this person. If you have the toolkit, you actually won't see a wheel in there. I'm happy to share a sample report. Marisol can share it as well. But you will see on various pages of the toolkit that we link to, you'll see all 24 strengths listed. So let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 5. Yeah. So then if we look at this, you could even narrow to your top 3 energizers. And if you haven't and don't want to take the assessment, you could still look at this list and really think about, okay, which 3 are my most crucial for me to feel energized at work? I kind of chuckled to myself because I think for me, I had strategic mindedness, efficiency, and common sense. And it struck me when I was learning this, I was teaching Pivot a day later, and the way my friend introduced me to the group was saying, Pivot is the most obvious framework, and I joked to the group that, hey, don't worry, that's a compliment. So for me, strategic mindedness, common sense, and efficiency, it was like, man, this is inefficient how we're thinking about what's next. There's got to be an obvious, better way to go about figuring out what's next. And so applied my strategic thinking. And then you'll see the shortest blue bars are drainers. For this person, efficiency is a clear drainer, and even compassion. So it doesn't mean that they're not compassionate and that this is like a horrible person or something, or if empathy was really low. But it might mean that, this person, yes, they like developing others, but it doesn't really energize them. They wouldn't be energized by social work, let's say, as we talk about the people quadrant. Maybe this one doesn't. The one-on-one, in-depth, kind of more emotional work wouldn't interest them, whereas being in a sales meeting would, that they're kind of talking more about the business. For them, efficiency and systems, it's a drainer. For me, collaboration was a total drainer. And it made me realize why I like to be self-employed and why having meetings all day just wasn't working for me. So drainers, we'll talk more about that, but it would be really interesting to look and start to understand what your energizers are, what your top 3 part of your formula, and then what drains you. And we have some great chat happening. So Elizabeth said, Facebook Live is her extrovert side. Surprisingly fun when you let yourself just be yourself. And Stephanie writes, I am the extreme introvert who would rather write it out alone in a dark room for 3 hours. See, I think it's so cool. It's like you might both have an interesting piece of content to share. And then look at the expression that it energizes Elizabeth to be on Facebook Live. It energizes Stephanie to be writing alone and getting into the zone. And even Wade's story, Wade, you could weigh in on what energizes you too related to this. Okay, so now let's go back. One of the piece of homeworks that you can do, this is in the toolkit on page 6, is called the energy journal. So an exercise you can do after this session is get the toolkit that we linked to and just either look back on your last week, or as you go about the week ahead, start writing down everything that energizes you and everything that drains you. And you can write this at the high level of projects, but you can also go within a project. What is it that drains you? Or within meetings, you know, so you don't have to just say, oh, meetings are an energizer or a drainer. What types of meetings energize you? What types of meetings drain you? Or emails, any part of your day or your week, start to observe. I always think, even in the Delegation Ninja course, the first and most powerful step around all of this is awareness. And again, for me, after I took this session, I realized I kind of just go through my week. I don't really stop and say, what energizes me? What drains me? And how do I rework the formula on a week by week basis? But that is possible. How this ties in with pivot. So if you recall, the pivot framework is, it builds on your strengths. And I've always said, you know, start from your strengths, start from what's working. But as you think about mapping how you want to grow in the year ahead, start with not just what are you good at, what do you get great feedback on, but what energizes you most. And that when we look at this question, what's working, it's what energizes you, because again, that's that intrinsic motivation that pulls you out of bed in the morning. It pulls you with excitement and that flow state of losing yourself, losing track of time, being completely immersed. And that is where the most powerful growth can really come from. And Caitlin says, like your hot or colder exercise in the workbook. Exactly. A similar way to do this is to say, as Caitlin's pointing out in the Pivot workbook, think about the game you used to play as kids where you hide something around the house. And then as the person goes and looks, you're saying cold, freezing, freezing, they're getting farther away, or hot, hotter, on fire. And that means they're right there about to find it. So you could also draw 3 columns like hot, warm, and cold, and observe throughout the week. Once you know what energizes you, then in the scanning stage of Pivot, scanning is for people, skills, and projects. So to tie these two together, once you know what your energizers are, you can also look and say, people, what people energize you most? And of course, drainers, who drains your energy. What people, what skills would energize you? What could you double down on? And what projects would really excite you? I'll give you a recent example, the podcast. I love the podcast. I just did Heart of Podcasting. I've made priceless friendships and relationships. But for some reason, I had been procrastinating. I think it was figuring school out, taking a leave. I moved. You could see I'm in a different room. I'll have to show you all my bookshelf before we hang up. It's my pride and joy of the new house. But the bottom line was I was procrastinating. It had this thing I love had become a drainer. And that's how I knew I just need a break. So I ended up pausing Patreon and refunding any patrons for the month of March, because don't want to take anyone's money if we're not putting out new content. And it doesn't mean that it's a never again. It just means that right now, something about it, I have not solved the equation where it's back in the total energizer category. So for me, this has been immediately helpful for being able to understand what to pause, what to experiment with, and where to just create more space for the energizers. Peggy shared, fascinating. Top for me are creativity, empathy, decisiveness, and least results focus, efficiency, persuasiveness, common sense. Super interesting. Yeah, feel free if you have taken this and you want to share. Megan said, I'm empathy, self-improvement, and compassion, all tied directly to my Clifton strengths of empathy, learner, connectedness, and individualization. And my drainers are emotional control, no poker face here, me too, and decisiveness, hate being the one to pick restaurants, me too, and flexibility. I like order, me too. We're so similar. Carrie says, my top 3 are no surprise to me: creativity, common sense, and leading. Drainers are flexibility, self-confidence, enthusiasm, and emotional control. Elizabeth writes, I used to love networking events, like really, really love them. In the last few years, I have no interest. Not sure what happened, but there was a big shift. It is so interesting to see how these shift, and then even the expression, like the way you network might change. When we think about the pivot framework and the 3rd stage pilot, and we apply this to energy strengths and energy intelligence, think about experiments, small experiments that you could run in the next few weeks to try and get that 20%. Like, what would it look like to do 20% more of your time spent on energizers? And then what pilots could you run to start to remove your drainers? So that takes us into this discussion of what derails us from working in a flow state, from our maximum point of energy. There's 2 things we're going to talk about: going into overdrive and then drainers. Overdrive is actually when you are so good at something, or something is such an energizer for you that you go overboard, in a sense. Think about empathy. If you're somebody that empathy energizes you, but you give and give and give and give and give, and you don't recharge, you're going to be drained. It's going to become an Achilles heel. Or even collaboration. You love it, but I just met someone at Union who lived on a commune. They split their salaries 15 ways in this apartment. She's like, the amount of work that it took to just talk and talk and talk all the time was exhausting, and make every decision together with 15 people. So you can start to think about which of your strengths can get into overdrive. For example, or somebody who is decision-making or efficiency, maybe those are strengths, but when in overdrive, it's like you fly through decisions so fast, you don't actually consider enough of the details. Or I'm just trying to think, maybe you can tell me in the chat one of your strengths or energy strengths that when pushed too far goes into overdrive. I like Megan says, where's the raise hand emoji in Zoom? Empathy, exactly. So what you can do is choose one thing. And again, you don't have to have taken the assessment. Identify what the consequences are. So for me, let's say with efficiency is one of mine, but a consequence of being almost too efficient is I take on too much. Or I had a friend who recently did Strengthscope, and she loves mission impossible projects. But she realized that when it's an overdrive, she takes on every mission impossible project. And then she's like saddled with 3 or 4 huge, massive projects at work, and it's overwhelming for her. Then you want to identify triggers. How do you know? What are your stress triggers? So on page 7 of the toolkit, there's a really interesting chart. So for example, what causes stress if, let's say, detail orientation is an energizer, substandard work and avoidable mistakes, also not having enough context. Or if it's a drainer, if you're drained by details, having to spend too much time mired in details. So some of the people I know who have detail orientation and critical thinking and common sense are drainers. They simply have to delegate. Like, they would not function well in their lives if they couldn't delegate, because they can't stand the details. But if you're a more detailed oriented person, you are going to be triggered by having to go into a situation without enough preparation. So even the example Peggy shared, that if you had to go in there and just improvise, I'm sure you could have done great, but it might have been more stressful. It would have triggered that feeling of wanting to be prepared. So you can think about, of the things that energize you, when do you get triggered? When do they tend to tip into overdrive? And then you could find another strength or more energy strength that balances it out. So how you can navigate it. And we call it a self-check. So for example, on page 9 of the toolkit, there is an overdrive self-check. For example, if enthusiasm is one of your energy strengths, my enthusiasm energizer makes me feel almost uncontainably excited when I start talking about something I care deeply about. Will you let me know if I need to turn it down a notch? I can directly give you an example of this. As you know, enthusiasm and optimism are two of my energizers. You don't have to know that about me, but it's like, maybe you notice when I'm talking, I'm like animated more of the time than not. Well, when I was going to teach at Chanel in Paris, they coached me. They said, try not to be too American. They said, it's not a bad thing. We want you to be yourself, but also the French audience is just different. And here's what you should know about them. And they're going to have more questions. And French education teaches people to be critical thinkers and poke holes in things. So you just might want to be mindful of how you share ideas, how you throttle your enthusiasm, and then how you handle questions where they might be poking holes in something. And everyone's laughing in the chat. This is great. Carrie says, I'm regularly told I'm not a typical American. Must be the low enthusiasm. So yeah, I'd want to know, okay, when my enthusiasm is in overdrive, for example, if I'm speaking to a room of engineers, even when I work with Google and they say, okay, this audience is all engineers, I know that group will probably want more data and more facts and more statistics and more references and research than just pure unbridled enthusiasm, if that makes sense. The other way that we get derailed from working in a flow state is burnout. And this is something that I've been passionate about for years, as many of you are also aware. And we talk about this a lot in Momentum. And it's a big one. So the other one is that whether we're in overdrive or we're working with drainers, sometimes we just keep pushing through. And just like your phone, if you don't recharge, it's going to turn off. But unlike our phone, we don't even turn off. We just keep going and we try to power through with no power. Or you could even think about it in terms of your phone in that certain apps are going to drain your phone's battery more than others. And that, for me, I love the metaphor applied in this way, that when you think about what's on your plate at work, like a smartphone, like this image here, certain apps are going to drain your battery incredibly fast. And then other ones won't. And so this is where the drainer part I find very, very interesting. So I want everybody to think now about an activity from the past week or month at work that really drained you. And please share in the chat. Or we can do a quick popcorn if anyone wants to jump off of mute. But I would love to hear. Get specific. I want everyone to think of one thing that really drained you. Just felt like a drag.
I have something.
Yes, go for it, Carrie.
And it's interesting because now I'm maybe starting to see why the self-confidence is a drainer for me. Is pretending to know things.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Kind of that imposter syndrome, but maybe even more when I really know I don't know what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
That happened on Monday with a meeting with a client. Luckily, it was not a video call because I was totally freaking out. I'm like, I don't know anything what you're talking about, and now I have to do this. So it was so hard for me to just keep going and pretend that I knew, and knowing that the person I'm working with and I could find the answers and do something. It would just be a lot harder because we've never done this before, and we have to learn a bunch of new things in a really short amount of time. And they paid me really good money. So that was really difficult.
It's interesting because when self-confidence is an energizer, it means the person really likes to be the expert and kind of get out in front of a room. That's because I was asking about self-confidence. To me, some of these at first sounded like, well, obviously, if you're confident, you're energized, duh. But it's more refers to kind of being the expert. And if self-confidence is low, it doesn't mean you're not confident, but it means that for the person whose self-confidence is not an energizer, it's a drainer, it means you can't stand like fake it till you make it. That just wouldn't work for you. And I don't know if you took the assessment, like where on the wheel, where that bar shows up.
Yeah, that's one of my lowest ones.
There it is.
Yeah.
So something I'm observing as I talk to more people and what their assessments show, again, yeah, it's not that you're not a confident person. It's more like fake it till you make it just isn't going to work. And so for you, what I love is this table on 13, the last page, drain or compensate. You would ask yourself, what helps me? What allows me to feel confident and ready? So if you find a drainer, you can actually navigate your drainers through one of your energizers. So for example, a detail-oriented person or strategic thinking might say, I feel more confident when I'm very prepared, when I've had time to dive into every last detail and plan ahead. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That I was wondering about the self-confidence, but what you say, that makes perfect sense, mm-hmm. and it fits.
Thank you for sharing that example. That's a great one. I'm laughing out loud because Theo wrote, I dated one of those fast draining apps. Yeah, we know. I'm sure we all know what that's like on some level. Stephanie writes, for me, the office environment is absolutely, completely draining and dreadful, and I hate being trapped inside all day. It's a good thing it's your last day tomorrow. What I find fascinating, because I was finding certain classes at Union to be incredibly draining. And I realized that the Union blueprint was all about critical thinking, kind of criticism, poking holes, and like, let's say, a certain form of thinking. And then I realized when I saw my wheel, I had this aha moment, because mine's enthusiasm, optimism, like positive thinking, and it just didn't seem welcome there. I constantly felt like I was oil and water. Like I was the idiot that was just optimistic, the optimistic idiot. And then now I'm being hard on myself, but this is how I felt in many different class settings. And so when I saw my wheel, I realized why the environment felt draining. So I'd be curious for you, Stephanie, unpacking, what is it? Can you connect the office environment to your wheel? Because I know you are one that did take the assessment, and it'd be interesting to find the actual energy strengths that contribute to that draining. That's what I find interesting about this. And that goes back to Wade's question about language. What's the language? Because we could say that something is draining or energizing, but why? And that's where I think this gets really interesting. Caitlin says, a compensation and analysis committee meeting this week. No power to change anything. No joy. Caitlin, see if you can connect it to your wheel. Those of you who took the assessment, I'd love for you to try and connect it to the wheel and give me one or two of the drainers that might relate to why these activities felt so draining. Elizabeth says, working on switching my group coaching program from a different technology to Zoom, had to go through lots of tech checks and info. I really don't like tech problem solving. Great. I wonder what, again, maybe it's like attention to detail, or I don't know. We'll have to look at the wheel. Kevin says, filling out standard or routine forms is draining. Yeah, for someone who has high creativity as an energizer or initiative, feeling like you're stuck in maintenance is super draining. Stephanie says, let's see, work environment is key for my overall day-to-day energy, makes a huge impact on my personal and professional life. Let's see, I'm just skimming now. Yay. Okay, I'll come back to read some of these. Stephanie wrote, so empathetic and intuitive that the crowded office energy drains me relentlessly. Makes sense. Megan says, detail orientation, which is one of my 7, so feeling like others did not have that while I was gone. All right, so when we look at the wheel and we think about drainers, how do we manage our drainers? One option is stop doing it. Now, this is not always an option if you're working for someone else or with someone else, but at least ask. At least ask, does anybody need to do this? And If so, can you fix the process? How could you optimize? How could you create some systems around this? Another option is to outsource or barter. So maybe you have within your control to delegate somehow at work, or you can swap. Maybe there's a colleague that, like, for example, I've had 2 working relationships for several years that have served me so well. And the funny thing is, I'm a E, although more of an I, NFJ. And I've now worked with 2 ENFPs, one at Google, one at Chanel, where they're always so thankful that I'm the one that like types up our meeting notes and types up the agenda for or the facilitator guide, the thing that takes our ideas into like a concrete, organized system. And they always remark like, wow, my friend Becky used to say, thank you for being the J to my P, so this was a good example of bartering. And then my colleague at Chanel, for example, we did this presentation and she spruced it up and made it look more on brand for Chanel. Like, I don't like to do that. I don't like designing PowerPoint decks. That was one of the things that made me miserable when I was at Google. I would so much rather be presenting it than designing it. You can also reframe it. So we talked about, and the great example of presenting and self-confidence. Well, maybe confidence in being the expert is not an energizer. And in fact, it's a drainer. But if you reframe it through the lens of knowledge sharing or another energizer like creative thinking or strategic thinking or problem solving, or even relationship building, or in Peggy's example, advocating, then there could be other doorways that help you reframe that activity if it's not something you can get rid of completely. Of course, you can learn more about it. We tend to do better overall when we emphasize our strengths. It's so much research is behind that notion that just improving on weaknesses, you just get marginal return. But there's no reason you can't learn more about certain areas that drain you. And sometimes that can take some of the dread and procrastination away. And then 6, own it. You can't always get rid of it. So if you own it, you own it. And then that's where page 13 of the toolkit is really helpful, is that you say, all right, well, okay, so for me, and it's true, resilience is low. It's not an energizer for me, which is part of the reason I wrote Pivot. I didn't feel very resilient to change. So the question on page 13, the compensation question is, what helps me be resilient despite my challenges? So, okay, great. Meditation, spiritual practices, and this is where I get into getting outside, exercising. So you can ask yourself, what helps me be resilient despite challenges? And you could look at your energizers to kind of swap one with the other. Carrie writes, I'm going to try co-working. Great. Co-working space in April. After nearly 4 years of working at home by myself, I'm drained. Yeah, Stephanie, will be interesting for you too, working from home. You guys will do a little bit of a switch. Although co-working is a nice hybrid between the two. Co-working is like, it's just, I think what's so interesting about this is that we all have such unique approaches. And again, even the word creativity, for me, creativity was a 10 out of 10 as far as an energizer, but I'm not a visual artist. I'm not creative in that way, but I do like creating new things or creatively solving problems. When you look at this summary of how to manage drainers, another way that I share in Delegation Ninja is for something that's a drainer, you either do it, drop, delegate, or automate. So that's another like little four-part framework you could ask yourself. Do I have to do this? Can I drop it all together? If not, can I delegate it? And should anyone be doing it? Can we automate it? And that's a conversation that Marisol and I have a lot is, hey, I don't want her to do work that doesn't energize her. So how do we automate it so that like nobody has to do that kind of draining, detail-oriented work? So this challenge of managing your drainer, I encourage you to observe over the next week or two, just like you're observing in your energy journal, your energizers and your drainers, and try to pause. I think part of the takeaway here is not just going through your week on autopilot, but really pausing it and saying, aha, this is a drainer, and not taking it personally. What I really appreciate about this assessment and this instrument and this language is that it allows you to just say, this thing drains me. You're not bad at it. You're not a bad person. It's not a flaw of yours. It's just that it drains you. It's as simple as that. So once you can say that out loud, it can be more empowering to then do something about it. It's not this sense of feeling bad, like, oh man, I should like it here. I should like it in the office. I should like this kind of work. No, this is a drainer. And I have found it very freeing and empowering to just admit that and go with it. So to summarize this recipe for flow, we've talked about your skills and talents, which you already know about. You've been developing your skills and talents your whole career, and school education is all oriented toward competency. Now the question is, how can you really hone in on the activities that energize you and why? Trying to kind of label them and really get your own unique formula. And then how can you start to remove, or I was going to say mitigate, but that's kind of like an annoying corp speak. But how can you mitigate or kind of modulate some of your more derailing activities? So I want you to think now, and feel free to start typing in chat. What's one thing you could do to increase your energy intelligence? And that might be the energy journal. Maybe you have another idea that you can share with the group. And then how will you observe and avoid your derailers, whether it's overdrive or a drainer? And maybe you have some specific ideas. So I'll give you a couple minutes. And in fact, why don't I just finish the presentation, and then I want to hear, you can pop off mute. It'd be great if whoever wants to can say one insight from this, one insight or an aha, which I always like to do because I think it helps all of us sort of synthesize material in an interesting way. If you synthesize to one thing, and then one commitment that you will make. So one thing that you'll actually experiment with in the week ahead. Peggy says, love this image with the track on the road. Yes, I can't take credit. It's my friend Josh at Helios. But speaking of networking, it was such a cool story. Josh and I met blogging over 10 years ago, and I introduced him to my friend Julie. And then now this is the first time we had seen each other in person in a long, long, long time. But we ended up being hired together to do this Train the Trainer. So it was a really cool kind of reconnection to this, to Josh, who is running this Helios company. All of this is a spark. When I first saw this material, I felt like, all right, great. I've done a million assessments. What's another one, But I have to say that it did spark my thinking. I did start to have ahas when I really started to unpack energizers and drainers and say what puts me in a flow state more often, more reliably. You'll see in the toolkit on page, I believe it's page 5, is highest and best. So I love this question. Is what I'm doing right now the highest and best contribution I could be making to my team, my organization, our noble cause, etc.? And if the answer is yes, great. If it's no, if whatever you're doing is not your highest and best use, how can I create a plan that will allow me to do this for the last time? So I really do think that this material can spark a lot of reflection, a lot of observation over the weeks and months ahead, and a lot of experiments. And that's what I encourage all of you to do. Observe, experiment, reflect, and please share in Facebook, because I would love to hear how it's going. What changes do you make? Big emphasis for Strengthscope. They say this is not an assessment, it's an instrument. And like any musical instrument, it takes practice. This is about practices. It's not about hearing something once and then everything changes. You actually have to practice it. You have to make the changes. It is like learning a language. You only get better when you practice. Think about those of you who have learned a second language where you feel you understand more than you can speak. And for me, that tends to happen because I'm embarrassed. I'm embarrassed to try. So I notice, okay, I know more words, and then I get frozen when it comes time to actually have a conversation. It's kind of similar with this, that you can hear me saying it, but until you actually apply it and talk about and have these conversations with coworkers, friends, clients, managers, like that's where it becomes really interesting. Even Marisol and I just did a kind of design your role check-in, and the whole conversation, I just said, what energizes you? What drains you? And you might not be able to change the drainers right away, but at least you can create awareness and then a plan. And I felt that alone was already so helpful. And I think for some people, certainly not those in Momo, but for some, it's a paradigm shift. Like, what do you mean we should be energized at work? That's not a right. Work is work. But I really do believe that when we are energized and in the zone and in a flow state, we're unstoppable. And that is when the most powerful, interesting, creative work happens. And that's when we thrive. So why not orient our days and weeks and what's on our plate around energy strengths every bit as much as competency strengths? Some next steps, if you haven't already, download the workbook. You can take the assessment if you haven't already, but you've maybe watched this recording and you want to take it, you still can. There's no time limit or anything. There's a related course, Delegation Ninja, which some of you may have taken long ago. It's in Momentum, pivotmethod.com/courses-workshops. And the password is, Marisol has it. It's in the Monday mailers. But that one's good if you want to rethink, oh yeah, okay, there are a lot of drainers on my plate that I want some help with. Because so much of this, even though collaboration is not a big one for me, it's a drainer. I do get energized when I'm collaborating through delegation. And it's like taking things off my plate that really drain me. And then please share wins and experiments in our Facebook group. So let's move on to questions. And I would love to go around. You could just type in the chat or pop off mute if you want and share one insight and one experiment that you're going to try. We could go in any order. Megan, you want to go first?
Sure. So I really like this. So I'm getting myself more familiar with Clifton Strengths, which there's a lot of alignments here, but where that maybe focuses more on kind of how you approach things and your natural abilities to kind of do things. Mm-hmm. This is much more around the energy levels, which I think if you pair the two together is really helpful. Given where I am right now, just kind of going back into an environment that I left for a reason so long ago. I think what I plan on doing this week or for the next few weeks is really kind of monitoring where my energy is to kind of understand, okay, I left this for a reason. Maybe I can pinpoint some specifics as to why.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you.
Who else?
It's Steph, I'll go.
Great.
So for me, I think this was just could not have been better timing for going into my solopreneur life next week. So my aha moment and my action item are both just to, really truly be aware and self-conscious of what's draining and not getting stuck into old work habit patterns just because that's what I'm used to. But I am planning on actually just taking a few weeks off and just saying fuck it. I've never had time off before like that. So I'm gonna really reset and then take time to reflect and figure out what I'm going to do. So, and thank you, Jenny, for that encouragement. Because I think that was one of your pieces of advice a few months ago. And I was going back through notes and I read it. I was like, you know what? I'm not starting full force April 1st anymore. I'm going to go to Scotland. I'm just going to, so thank you very, very much. I really appreciate it.
Great. It's someone, not me, made up a term, precation. It's the pre-vacation before you start a new phase. And what I think will be so interesting about it is my friend Neil Pasrica calls it the Saturday morning test. What do you do when your time feels like it's totally your own? And Stephanie, in your case, you're giving yourself this epic window that's going to be so informative of your authentic energizers, when you think you're on a break from work, but knowing what do you do? How do you spend your time? What lights you up? And you're going to have a perfect
Thank you. Yeah, like if I didn't have to make money for a month, what would I do? And
yes.
I'm like, I can survive for a month, or like I can survive for more than that, but like just like not doing anything. So thank you for that encouragement.
Yeah, I'm so excited for you.
Let it be easy, let it be fun.
Yeah.
I repeat that constantly in my mind.
I love it. Amazing, amazing. Thank you. I'm so excited for you. Oh my gosh. What else? What else came up? What will you try? Theo, are you unmuting? Are you almost there? Peggy, you want to go?
Yeah, so when I just read the results today, because I took it last night, and it really surprised me to see it about the results focus, efficiency, persuasiveness, and common sense were drainers. And so at one of your last slides, you wrote, I commented, it disappeared now in the chat. But I'm going to go forward of thinking about, sometimes I get too caught up in the empathy and the relationship building and the creativity and then decisiveness out of that, but I don't really have a plan. So my step forward is going to be looking at the things that drain me and see how I can use them to say, I don't ever want to do this again. And so if I don't, how am I going to plan that?
Yes. Yes. I love like empowering yourself to just say that. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead, Elizabeth.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to cut anyone off. Hi, it's Elizabeth. I was excited to share my aha. I figured out why I don't like networking events anymore.
Yes, let's hear it.
Yeah, it's because it's not enough of a challenge. So now what's super energizing to me is like meeting random strangers spontaneously and then becoming my friend. So like I do this all the time now. Like I joined the Y for swimming and I'm like, I just made a new friend today. Or like if going to a coffee shop, I was at a coffee shop recently and I like connected with someone new. So I think it's just, I had so many years. I love meeting new people. I'm an ENFJ, but I think I was thinking about the like skills challenge, and just because I'm so comfortable at networking events, like I can like meet people there with my eyes closed, like it's no big deal at all. The thrill of like, no one knew this was going to happen and you weren't even expecting to meet someone new and I wasn't either. And then we did. It's like, oh yeah. So anyway, so that solved my challenge. And then in terms of, like my observation, I've been doing coaching for over 10 years. And so I think for me, just thinking about, again, how do I up the challenge level on my coaching? So I started doing group coaching. So I've been doing that, which is definitely like a new challenge, next level. But I think even in my one-on-one coaching, I need to be thinking about like, how do I keep it exciting for me and my clients, or do something beyond coaching? So anyway, I was really excited about the aha because I had been wondering for a long time, why am I so bored by networking events? And that's why I'm just like too good at it. So.
That's so funny. Way to pinpoint it. And I love how you're describing, I call it like meeting people out in the wild. It's why dating apps never worked for me. I'd so much rather have that serendipity feeling and the like, neither of us were planning on this.
It's like a thrill. It's a serious thrill. I can't even describe how awesome it is. And I'm sorry for the introverts out here that are annoyed by extroverts because we're like, let's talk.
Speaking of meeting in the wild, you guys reminded me, Michael texted I had locked him out. So hold on one second. And Caitlin also asked about the bookshelf. So look, there's Michael. You want to wave? Everyone's on there. Sorry. Everyone's waving at you. You got a hello. Everyone's waving. So there's a big secret that I'm going to share in our next Q&A call, but we got married in November. I know.
Wow, congrats.
Thank you. And here's the bookshelf.
Congrats.
Thank you. There's the bookshelf.
And congrats on this too. I don't know what I'm more excited about right now.
There's that, and here's the white shelf because the colored section took up too much. The fanfare with which I just told you we got married, we haven't posted on social media or anything. I emailed a reply to a friend that this was happening, and she's like, "You sent this to me in an email reply? Like, what's wrong with you?" But that's how chill it was. So I was like, I can't wait to tell all of you. We just did a little city hall. It's not public or anything, but Thank you for your excitement. Oh, great. So anyway, there you saw the bookshelf. I can post a picture, but thanks for all the notes of congrats. I didn't mean to hijack the end, but he was locked out. So it figured like, well, speaking of in the wild and perfect trade and perfect timing. Cool. I love these stories. And I just wanted to circle back to what Peggy said too, like just the permission to observe and say, I'm going to strategize for these drainers. Like, it's okay that they're not energizing. I just think that that piece is so powerful. And then even what Elizabeth helped us do, which is like unpacking why something's working. And then Stephanie had also had this great suggestion of like introverts should pair up with an extrovert at a conference. I thought that was such a good idea. These are great things. Thanks for all the excitement. How nice. Unplanned informal tour. You got it. I would love to hear from anyone else who wants to share what's an energizer. So drainer. Speaking of getting married, social media is a drainer for me. I've shared it on month after month of like momentum calls. And the notion of posting that we got married on social media was a drainer. I just didn't want anyone weighing in. It was like our own little private day at City Hall. And it's funny to think about it because I kind of gave myself permission that it's okay. Like there's no rule, although it's strange, although I tell people at random times, like how I just told all of you, it kind of feels good to just admit the difference between the two. Who hasn't shared yet? Who wants to go? I'd love to hear from anyone else, either in chat or on video. I know we're right at time, but if anyone else wants to share, I'd love to hear.
Hey, this is Kevin.
Hi, Kevin.
So one thing that I wanted to mention is that I really like the compensating questions that you have in the toolkit.
Oh, great.
Particularly, so the thing that I have to find as a drainer is detail orientation.
Yes.
I love the question of when am I able to focus on details? That's a nice way to reframe it to say, when can I focus on details if I have to? So I thought that was very helpful. So I want to say thanks for that.
Yeah. Did you come up with any first response of when you're able to focus on details?
Yeah, usually after lunch when I'm feeling less focused on creativity, that sort of thing. I put on some music and that helps me kind of get in that detailed mindset. So I think that's when I would do that.
I love it. I know it's interesting to think about how would you slot your day based on energizers and drainers. And for me, when I'm like, if it's a draining activity, like running errands, I like to listen to a podcast. Or cooking for me, I wish it was more of an energizer than it is, but it makes it more of an energizer when I can listen to a podcast while cooking, for example. So I like your comment about, and thank you for pointing out the detail orientation, like that question, when am I able to focus on details? And that maybe that helps us plan our day, our kind of energy intelligence about within a day itself. That's very interesting. What else? Anyone else want to share?
I'll share.
Great.
Yeah. One insight. I actually think I'm going to take this test. I don't normally take these kind of tests. I've done, I guess, some stuff like this before, not specifically like this, but maybe one of these tests. And the problem is I never do anything with it, right? Like, I don't want to take this and it's going to give me information and I'm just going to sit on it. However, as most of you guys know, I'm right now in a coding boot camp and I'm leveling up my skills and it's going great. And I've also had health issues for a long time, so I haven't worked full time in a long time, like a long time. In fact, this year it will be half my life. Actually, this year, should I share this on video? All right, this year I'm going to be 50, and I also celebrate 25 years of being sick. And so it's like, this is like a big year for me. Actually, 25 years of being out on disability, Pearl Harbor Day, December 7th. So I am hoping that I am planning on not celebrating that anniversary. I am like, I want to get a job full time off disability before then. It may happen, maybe it won't. But so my insight is that I think this would probably be a really good thing for me. My birthday's coming up next month, and it'd be like, this would be my birthday present to myself, and then actually it's not just that, but this is why I'm saying this with all of you guys as witnesses, that I need to do something with it. Like, I really need to like sit down and say, okay, what am I going to do with this? What's my action? How am I going to implement this? But this actually resonates a lot with me. Like, everything that people were talking about and things like that, I'm like, yeah, this is like, I mean, there's certain things I sit down and like, oh my gosh, talking about I work from home. So talking about the distractions, and like, it takes me hours to do something I really don't want to do. And then other things, I'm coding at 10 o'clock at night. I'm like, oh, I should probably have dinner sometime soon. That's not healthy, but I'm just saying, I definitely feel that energy times and drains in a big way. And I'm also a big introvert. And so I'm aware of being around people and those kind of things. But this would probably really help me, even just in a small way of directing me into, I've always had in my mind, like, it's going to be really hard for me to find the job. Like, who would hire me? And I changed that to, I am going to be very particular about finding the right fit for me.
Yeah.
And just changing my languaging of those types of things has really been a game changer for me. It's not like, it's not like, can I work even though I'm sick? It's like, how am I going to work given my current physical issues? So, yeah. Anyway, so my action item is I am going to take the assessment. I may have to pause that for a little bit because I'm in school and things are really busy, but I imagine it doesn't take that long. So I'll figure that out. So.
Well, no rush. What a powerful time. And I love your reframe that you shared. Peggy also shared a great question on okay, bye Gary. Carrie has to jump. Thank you for being here. Peggy's question was, in spiritual intelligence, I ask, what meaning will I make with this? In contrast to why. I thought that was really cool in relation to what you were saying, Theo. Yeah. And I'm happy for you. If you take Strengthscope, there's no rush, but we can chat about it too. What a powerful birthday present.
Yeah, it's great. Yeah.
And as you were saying, it's funny, before you even mentioned you were worried about finding a job. When you said you were going to take Strengthscope, and I was thinking to myself, man, there are so many companies that need what energizes you, that critical thinking and detail orientation. There are so many people already I've worked with on Strengthscope where it's like they're lacking that. They really need that. They really wish there was someone on their team who had those qualities. So I think it's so true. Like, you really will be the perfect fit for the right company. That's a perfect fit for you.
Yep. Yeah. I kind of realized that with dating as well. It's like, sometimes there's a match and sometimes there isn't. And it doesn't mean anything about me or the other person.
Right.
And even like in friendships and things like that, there's an energy there, and like there's some people who are really attracted to and there are other people who aren't. And it doesn't mean the other people are bad people.
Right.
It's just not a match.
That's how I feel about this. That's why I like this one. There's nothing wrong. It's just, we're all different. And that's what makes a good team, is that when we complement each other. How can we all expect each other to be the same or to be like 10 out of 10 energy on every single area of life? It's not going to happen.
If everyone were like me, I'd be bored out of my mind.
Totally.
Anyway,
I know. Thank you for sharing, Theo. Thank you. I really appreciate you bringing your vulnerability and personal, everybody, like always. It just blows me away what you're all willing to bring and how we connect on these. And, I think you said something, Theo, that I'm really hopeful about, that we can all continue this in momentum in Facebook. Like, I want to keep hearing what insights come up, because just hearing it today on this session, it's okay. I mean, you're probably going to think like, I've heard this all before in some form or another, but I'm finding that as it sinks in and as you have conversations, that's where it gets more interesting. So that's why let's all agree to just keep each other posted and share wins and experiments, because that's where it's going to start to really change things. Thank you. Peggy says, I needed this. I loved it. And I've been missing Momo. We've been missing you. So happy to have you. I know we're over time, but does anyone have any questions about the Strengthscope, about the instrument or anything? I just want to make sure I address any of those high level questions before we jump. So I'm happy to stay a couple minutes longer. I know some of you will have to run, which is no problem. Elizabeth says, have to head out. Thank you for being here and have fun with your swimming and making new friends in the wild. Bye, Elizabeth. Any questions or things on your mind as it relates to the assessment and to this conversation around upgrading your energy?
Jenny, I do have a question.
Sure.
So in the actual assessment,
yeah,
on a couple of the pages, it talks about, so like, for example, decisiveness, and then it says strengthening your performance or overdrive risks and how to reduce them.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about those? Like, is that really just to grow deeper into that and then to just be aware of?
Yeah. So what that's outlining, it's just giving you more context on the overdrive piece. So for all of your significant 7, and I actually don't find those pages quite as helpful because those of us in momentum, most of us have somewhat atypical work setups, you know? And I thought that some of the advice that they were giving in the overdrive risks were like very traditional. The Strengthscope is actually a British company. So the assessment is from a UK company, and then Helios has the US rights.
Okay, and that makes it, because I turned to the decisiveness, and that's a skill that's grown with the job I have right now. But it said if you were over hasty or rash in decision making, and I kind of like, it didn't fit. Like it felt like a drain actually to read that.
Right.
In a weird way.
I like in the toolkit that I kind of assembled on page 12, for example, let's go to decisiveness. There's a sharing appreciation.
Okay.
So making quick, confident, and clear decisions, even when faced with limited information.
Yep.
To me, that's like,
that's more me than I don't know, maybe I'll read through those, but it kind of was, I was looking at it going, oh, this feels like a drain. Like, cause I start analyzing, how am I doing that?
I think those are kind of like really kind of traditional, the way they've written those. And then I even like sharing idiosyncrasies on page 11, I think is really fun. So on decisiveness, I think any decision is better than no decision. My default tendency is to keep us moving. Help me know if I'm deciding too quickly. And I realized I can sometimes bulldoze others because I'm like, well, duh, it's obvious. I have decision making and common sense. And so for me, I'm just flying through decisions. And then they're like, wait, slow down, or what are you doing? You know, it's like, I realize I can make people uncomfortable. So I like this idiosyncrasies one.
I like that.
Yeah.
That feels like it has a positive slant to it, where something I can grow into of saying, you know I might be deciding too quickly, so let me just step versus the other way.
And if we keep circling back to energy strengths, it energizes you to make decisions quickly. It would drain you to be constantly, bureaucracy would probably really drain you where you couldn't, you didn't have autonomy to make decisions. So I think for you, another learning around the decisiveness piece is, wow, I thrive when I have autonomy to make decisions. And how do you negotiate those work relationships to give you the autonomy you need to like move?
That explains why what happened to me with my boss yesterday drained me so bad.
Really?
I gotta talk a little lower, even though
that's okay.
I was making I'd made all my decisions through the whole thing. And then I didn't have the autonomy to do any of it suddenly. It was just taken right away. And I didn't see that as tied to decisiveness, but it totally is.
Very interesting.
Because I'd done everything I do in my flow.
Yeah. Like you were flowing. Right. Very interesting. Very interesting. How crazy it just happened yesterday.
So it's not just what drains you, but it's when your flow states or optimal states are taken from you in a situation.
Yeah. And I think what you just did is where this can become so powerful. You're like, oh, that's why that meeting drained me. You know, the meeting drained you. You know that you left feeling like your battery just went to red.
Oh, I did. I felt really shitty.
And now we know, we've like unpacked and connected it to the wheel and to one of your energizers. And said,
all 4 of my energizers were at play with what I did. and it
So
always just discounted and taken away.
Yeah. And I feel like now this is so powerful because now in the future you could bring up, you could say, oh, I noticed I really thrive when I have decision-making authority. And it's like, where did this language come from? Your boss or your manager might not know your process to get there, but you now have something more tangible you can share rather than just, I'm feeling drained at work and feeling stuck about it because you can't put your finger on it.
Mm-hmm. That's
how I felt with union as well. I was like, oh, that's why I wanted to cry that day that I came home from school, Oh man, thank you. You're helping. It's like the synapses are firing. I really appreciate you sharing that example.
Yeah, no, it's giving a lot of spaciousness back into my body.
I'm so glad.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so happy to see you as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does anyone else, even if you have a specific question about your wheel, if you took the assessment? Yeah.
I just wanted, because I think what you just said, sparked for me. So the reason I left my job 10 months ago is because I hit burnout, and then I kind of tried to power through it on a red battery for too long. So I completely burned out. But, in using the Clifton Strengths language helped me realize, and I'm also seeing it with this, is not that my strengths were kind of taken away from me, like you were just saying, but it was more of, I was actively ignoring the things that I do really well because I thought I should be doing all these other things instead. So I was kind of leaning into the drainers versus the energizers, which is a little bit opposite of going into the overdrive. It was like I was in complete underdrive.
Interesting.
All of those things.
And it's interesting too, because the shoulds, for me, where shoulds tend to come in is I think, well, there's something wrong with me. I should be doing all this work. So you don't think to kind of say anything about it because you're like, oh, well, it's on me. I'm just I'll speak for myself. I'm just faulty in some way. I should like this stuff. So you force yourself. Whereas maybe part of the shift is oh, hey, this it drains me. And so you do feel more empowered to. Yeah. It's interesting.
I call it shitting all over yourself.
Oh yeah, totally. Totally. I like how you described underdrive.
Yeah.
By leaning on the drainers, leaning into the drainers.
Yeah. Cause things like connection and empathy and kind of connecting with people really does fuel me. And I was in a state where I felt like I had so much I needed to do that I literally shut everybody out. I would just go into my office, close my door, and if anybody came in, it would frustrate me. I was like, get out. Yeah. As opposed to actually using that as a fuel for energy for me. Yeah.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that too. Any other questions on any of this? All right. Well, I've kept you over. Thank you for being here, all of you. It's such a delight. Thank you for letting me keep practicing all this material. And please, let's keep the conversation going in Facebook. My one thing I look forward to in Facebook is momentum. So I would love to keep the conversation going and hear any feedback that you have on what was helpful, what was interesting, because I want to keep tweaking the presentation too. So any and all feedback is more than welcome. Thank you all so much for being here and for sharing. And it's great to see you all on video. And we'll talk again soon for our next Q&A call. Thank you, everybody.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And the bookshelf. Both equally wonderful.
And you too on your almost last day of work.
Thank you.
So exciting. Yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys and gals.
Bye.